Before the American Revolution, there was the Pennsylvania Revolution, described in the new book, The Hamilton Scheme, as, quote, a bloodless military coup carried out by the state's armed working class, self-organized on behalf of the democracy, via efforts by Cannon and Young and the radical Philadelphia outsiders, toppled not just the assembly, but the whole government of Pennsylvania that William Penn had founded in 1681. They were looking to American freedom from Britain to cement their new power. They then voted for a resolution in the Continental Congress declaring independence from the British Crown. In the Hamilton Scheme, William Hoagland writes, drafted by Thomas Jefferson, a Virginia delegate, the Declaration would become famous for invoking equality. The word meant different things to different people. Neither Jefferson nor the other signers by any means believed that centralized government policy should regulate commerce to foster equality socially and economically throughout the United States. But the Declaration was issued by the Congress that July 4th only because people who believed in exactly that kind of equality pulled off a coup in Pennsylvania. The critical part played by the radical populists in bringing about the country's independence would be expunged, ironically enough, from the most popular renderings of the 4th of July story. At the time, the democracy thought it had good reason for placing itself at the center of the American Revolution. In September, with independence declared and the War of Independence underway, the radicals of Pennsylvania wrote a state constitution that fulfilled democratic dreams. Even the procedures for sending men to the convention were shocking to the American patriot elite that had adopted the Declaration. The convention delegates had been elected without regard for property. Joining us now is William Hoagland, author of The Hamilton Scheme, an epic tale of money and power in the American founding. And Bill, an epic tale it is. There's a multi-part limited series here. There's about 6 different great movies in this book. It's just fantastic. If you think you can make a musical out of the Hamilton story, this is incredible. So what we find throughout this book is that our founding story has way more mythology in it than we want it to. Historians have been highly complicit in that along the way. They've kind of wanted to glorify the founders. And what you find is this stuff in that advertising pamphlet, in effect, that the Declaration of Independence wasn't really in the heart of the people who were pushing it.
Yeah, you know, there's an odd, you just discussed the fact that there's an oddball tension there in Philadelphia in 1776 between the elite people who wanted independence from Britain but did not want a social revolution in America. They wanted things to stay more or less the same in terms of class structure. And some other people who are so much less well known than the famous founders, and yet great, idiosyncratic, weird, cool, you know, exciting, colorful people who really did want democracy at that moment, kind of a radical form of democracy. And this is like, there was a clash between them, and they also worked together. And that just creates a kind of seething, different kind of, it's a different kind of founding.
And they are all less famous, in fact, just simply not famous names, really, that most of us don't know unless we read this. They were much closer to the all men are created equal belief than Thomas Jefferson, who clearly wasn't. And most of those founders absolutely did not believe that.
Yeah, and all be created equal, okay, maybe, but the radical democratic types, small d democratic types there, they wanted government to actually foster equality through things like regulating commerce, for example, things that we don't talk about much until the 20th century.
Right.
Yeah.
And Hamilton seemed entirely focused on building wealth and building industry, and was very happy to have 7-year-old children working in factories in order to do that.
Yes, he and Washington, too, were sort of like, oh, one of the great things about the factory moment is we can get all these otherwise useless laborers, women and children, into the factories. And there were people, so that's one kind of unsettling fact, and it was the British model, basically. And then there were people who were actually pushing against that, who we hear so much less about. And we don't hear about factory labor law until we're talking about Francis Perkins and the New Deal and so forth generally. But there were people with those ideas then, too.
That's what I found so striking, is that there's people with what we would call 1940s ideas way back then at the founding, because we do a lot of forgiving of Thomas Jefferson, people like that saying, oh, well, he was a man of his era. Okay, but there were other people in that era who were far more advanced than many of these founders.
Yes, it seems anachronistic to talk about small d democracy and radical ideas about regulating the economy and so forth in the 18th century, but it's actually precisely anachronistic to erase those people and leave out that movement. And if you're looking for inspiration at that era for issues that we have today, you sometimes want to look past the famous founders, who really often are not helpful in that regard, and look to these less well-known people who were just as cool and different.
And that movement in the politics of the colonies and the developing states that was called the democracy was something that George Washington, Alexander Hamilton, and that crew felt had to be suppressed. The democracy had to be suppressed.
Yeah, they called it the democracy, and they did not mean that in a nice way.
It was not a compliment.
No, not at all. It meant mob rule to them.
Mob rule is what they thought.
Yeah, that's absolutely what they thought, and they did everything they could to suppress it.
You know, there's so many of our problems in this era, the Electoral College, the 2 senators per state. I take it back to these guys and these stunning mistakes that they made in designing this government. It wasn't just slavery. And there's a bunch of things that they got dramatically wrong. But I have a feeling they'd be shocked to discover us still using that old document.
Well, that's an interesting question that we'll never know the answer to, but it's a really good one. I mean, yeah, they weren't mistakes. They did them on purpose.
Yeah,
but
they didn't.
But if they were looking at them now, would they think that it all worked out perfectly, or would they actually be up for some change? We don't know.
They were not trying to give us the democracy that we would like to have.
Absolutely not. They didn't just happen to miss and fail to give us democracy. They were
okay, this is the one night I would like to do overtime and keep talking, but I can't do it. The book is The Hamilton Scheme, an epic tale of money and power in the American founding. This is the perfect July 4th gift. Grab it right now. It's perfect anytime. This is truly a great book. Bill Hoagland, thank you very much for joining us.
Is the president telling people he's evaluating the race?
False. That is absolutely false. I saw that reporting. We were not given enough time to get back to that reporting, just a couple of minutes, and we asked the president. The president responded directly when asked about this question because we said that we would, and the president said it is absolutely false. That's coming directly from him.
Leading off our discussion tonight is Quentin Fowlkes, Principal Deputy Campaign Manager for the Biden-Harris re-election campaign. Thank you very much for joining us tonight. And I can tell we're in a very serious moment in the campaign because we're able to get you, which we're not able to do most of the time when we really want to get you on here. I just want to go over this point again, raised by Kelly O'Donnell in the briefing today, because as you know, as we all know, it was that New York Times story this morning that really kind of recharge the whole question of is the president going to step down and open up the nomination to someone else or somehow steer the nomination to the vice president. Again, your response to that reporting in the New York Times where the president, I have to say, it's funny when you read it. It might be getting overinterpreted exactly what those people were saying to the New York Times, but I just want to, again, get your response to it.
Well, first of all, Lawrence, thank you for having me on. It's always a pleasure. It's unequivocally false. The president said himself that he is in this election. He met with Democratic governors today, reassured them that he is in this election to win it, as you guys saw earlier in the clip from Governor Hochul. The president told our staff today at campaign headquarters that he is in it to win it. And so that is where Joe Biden is. That remains unchanged since before the debate to now. And we're going to continue to do everything we can to make sure that we're building the campaign and the apparatus that is going to win this election, because make no mistake about it, the campaign that performs is going to win this election. And that is exactly what our campaign has been doing since April when the president announced for re-election.
So I wanted to be able to talk to you about exactly where this campaign is. And I think we have to talk about it now on a day-by-day basis, because here we are on July 3rd, basically a week from the debate. I could have imagined last Friday that by July 3rd, the subject would have moved on to something else. It's still where it was. The dialogue that you have to contend with, it's not the dialogue you want, but the dialogue you have to contend with out there is the president's age, his performance at the debate, which surprised a lot of people, including me. And was it surprising to you, knowing the president and having been around him as much as you have, especially as a campaigner? And I know that you're basically stuck in the campaign office most of the time, but you've been around him a lot more than a lot of people. Was it surprising to you to see the way he got stuck on some of those answers?
Well, the president is a human being. He had a bad night. He acknowledged it himself. He said that he had a bad performance. We understand that. He understands intrinsically what the American people saw, and our campaign understands, as well as the president, and under his leadership, now what we must do. And we make no qualms about that. We understand it. But at the end of the day, I think what's going on here is that not that our campaign wants to blow past this, because, again, we have acknowledged it, the president has acknowledged it, but I find it a major disservice to the American people that at the end of the day, we are talking about 90 minutes of Joe Biden's performance after he has delivered demonstrably for the American people. And at the same time, Donald Trump was granted immunity yesterday or 2 days ago. And the person that is in the job currently that could be using that immunity came out and said forcefully, this is dangerous. And we have still been talking about the fact that Joe Biden had a bad debate performance. It's the same as when we have skimmed over when Donald Trump says he is going to be a dictator. The same as when we skim over when Donald Trump says there's going to be a bloodbath if he loses. The same as when we skim over all of the extreme political violence, when Donald Trump says it would be okay for me to enact revenge against people who are against me politically. We've never had a president say that type of thing before. And Donald Trump is saying it routinely, and yet we get caught up on this. And so our campaign is not upset because we understand, and it's our burden and it's our responsibility to make sure that we are saying and acknowledging that the president had an off night. But, Lawrence, there are way more important things at stake here that just get glossed over. And it's time that we focus on them. And our campaign is going to continue to focus on them because those are the fundamental stakes of this election. Donald Trump only thinks about himself. He is a convicted felon who will do whatever it takes to keep and gain political power so that he can enact revenge and retribution. And the Supreme Court that he appointed justices to have given him the keys to do that. And we are focusing on a 90-minute debate performance. It's preposterous. Our campaign is going to do the work as we have been to continue to make sure that we are drawing the contrast to the American people. But make no mistake about it, Donald Trump is not interested in the job of being president of the United States to serve anybody except himself. And President Biden is waking up every single day, as we continue to see him do, even after an off day, to deliver for the American people.
So when I saw the president give his speech the day after the debate, North Carolina, 20-minute speech, that was the sharp, strong Joe Biden that I had grown accustomed to covering here. I ran most of that speech, a 20-minute speech. I might have run 19 minutes of it here that night. I expected to see one of those every day after that in order to recover from what had happened at the debate. Why? And this, by the way, was, I thought, one of the fair questions of the White House briefing today. Why hasn't the president delivered another one of those speeches every day or most days since then?
Well, look, I wish that we could, and the president wishes that he could. Nobody draws more energy from people than Joe Biden. But at the end of the day, he is still president of the United States. And there is a number of things that he must attend to because he, unlike Donald Trump, again, is actually interested in the job of being president of the United States. But we have seen the president out. We saw the president land at 2 a.m., greet supporters, and give that speech that you're mentioning in North Carolina. We've seen the president go to New York to fundraise. We have seen the president respond to the Supreme Court immunity ruling. We've seen the president go out and address extreme heat and the crisis on climate that this country is facing, that he is continuing to make investments in a priority of his administration in. And so we have seen the president out. And look, at the end of the day, sometimes everything doesn't get covered the same way that it does for major milestone events. We're not always going to have a State of the Union or a debate. But the president of the United States understands that this work is something that must continue even when everybody is not paying attention. And Joe Biden understands that, and Joe Biden is putting in the work every single day to continue to deliver for Americans and keep Americans safe both domestically and abroad.
So because this is the Biden-Harris campaign, all of the money raised by this campaign can be spent only by those two candidates. You can't hand it off to some other candidate in some of these dream scenarios that people have come up with. And Kamala Harris is the other candidate who can spend that money. And so I know where you are tonight. I know the president is in the race. I know you are all working on the Biden-Harris campaign. Is there any contingency plan discussion at all going on in the Biden-Harris campaign for mechanically how it would work if Joe Biden were to drop off the ticket and Kamala Harris were to move to the top of the ticket?
No, we don't need one. Joe Biden is the Democratic nominee. He said today that he is still running for president of the United States, and that's where our focus is. And our resources are going to continue to go on the ground to meet voters where they are in their community. The robust organizing programs. We had 1,500 organizing events in battleground states across this country, almost 25,000 volunteer recruitment shifts. And that's what remains fundamentally unchanged, is that before the debate and after the debate, our campaign has been building to make sure that we are going to be in a position to communicate to the American voters. We deeply believe that campaigns matter. The president believes that, which is why he has had a robust travel schedule to battleground states to communicate to American voters. And it's why our campaign has been investing money not just in the air, on television, radio, print, but also on the ground, communicating, building up an apparatus of organizers to bring in more volunteers to continue to get the message out that Donald Trump is a danger to this democracy and only cares about himself. And that is where our focus is. And so we don't need a contingency plan. Joe Biden is the nominee. He is running, and we're going to continue to use the money that we're raising, which I will also point out, after the debate, $26 million in grassroots fundraising donations, $33 million raised total. We continue to see support from grassroots supporters across this country supporting Joe Biden and Kamala Harris because they know what's at stake and they trust us to use those resources to bring this thing to victory. And that's exactly what we intend to do.
Final question about polls, because I know a lot of people out there are very urgently interested in polls and have been waiting. And I said, on debate night, let's wait to see the polls. We have now seen the polls. Most of them astonishingly negligible movement, 1 point maybe in one direction or the other, within the margin of error, a tie in all these polls, except for two polls, CNN poll, New York Times poll. They each show a 6-point spread, which is just outside the margin of error on those polls. Do those polls concern you? And is there something in those polls that suggests something that you need to do?
Not at all. The polls from day one have suggested that we need to fight. We understand that this is a margin of error race. It was a margin of error race before the debate, and it's a margin of error race after the debate. Look, Lawrence, I think you had me on after I had won Senator Warnock's race. It's not easy to shake me. I've seen polls that had me down 3 or 4 points, and I know what the work that had to go into it to bring that race back into focus. We've got into a runoff and did it again. But most importantly, Joe Biden knows that. He has been in the political realm for decades. He understands the work that has to go into this. And so all the polls show us is that we have to continue to do the work to communicate to the American people. But honestly, 7 of the 8 of the most public polls, including our internal polls, show this race within a point, margin of error victory. We're going to continue to do what we need to do to make sure that we're getting the message out to the American people. And so, no, the polls don't shake us. They haven't been since the beginning. There are going to be polls that show us up, down, and all over the place, left and right. But our focus remains steadfast on delivering for the American people and communicating to American voters where they are about the stakes of this election, which I will reiterate again. Joe Biden wakes up every single day thinking about the American people, and Donald Trump is literally on a quest to destroy our democracy because he only cares about himself, revenge, and retribution, and has no interest in doing the job of being president of the United States.
Quentin Fowlkes, thank you very much for joining us on this very important campaign day, and please come back as often as you can to update us on the status of the race.
Will do. Thank you so much, Lawrence.
Thank you.
Hey there, MSNBC fans. I'm Luke Russert, and be sure to join me, Rachel Maddow, Jen Psaki, Lawrence O'Donnell, Steve Kornacki, Joy Reid, and many more September 7th in Brooklyn MSNBC Live Democracy 2024. Click on the link for ticket information. We will see you there.